If I talk like this, can you hear me?
I was having coffee with a colleague last week, and I was saying that I'm battling to get my presentation for this week's symposium done, and he said, he rooted back to me that I'm not really paying justice or respect to my audience by leaving everything to the last minute. I should have at least 2 weeks preparation and reading time after that. The fact that I finished this at 4 o'clock this morning and I have a short-term memory problem at the moment doesn't really help you. Through this. The marriage between biodiversity projects and funded projects, whether it's NRMP, water funded, or any funding projects where you're looking at poverty relief, is not an easy union. So the marriage between SANParks and working for water. The question is it a good marriage and is it working? The Working Water program has been very innovative in breaking this ground where employing people to do certain work, and I think that's quite something that you should recognize there. And the union is, in essence, blessed with the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa, and if you look at the Millennium Goals, the same thing. So I think the church that this union was married in, the faith is quite strong. The strategic objectives of the breadwinner, being NRMP, are essentially, from what I can find out, is improve social economic benefits within the environmental sector, improve the sector education and awareness, and ecosystem services restored and maintained. The bed partner, that's us, SANParks, has a wider vision, and our main vision is connecting to society, and then we go through a whole lot of things about managing ecosystems and biodiversity and so forth, which is all very important to us. But if you dig down deeper into the whole SANParks strategies and objectives, you'll find under the invasive species strategy, you'll find these objectives listed there. Basically, it's also going to challenge me. Promoting the conservation of biodiversity, that's our main mandate. Providing public use benefits and enjoyment through sustainable sustainability or sustainable use and responsible tourism. Building a consistency of biodiversity conservation through a people and conservation program, and contributing to local economic growth. So with the Working for Water or NRMP objectives and the SANParks objectives further down in relation to invasive species, there is a marriage. So it looks like all the boxes are ticked. The breadwinner in the relationship being the NRMP have funded the SANParks. We got in 2002-2003 we got about 25.5 million, and then in 2013-14 it's come up to 216 million. This is on the 4 programs, so we're implementing quite a vast amount of money here. So we've got a big responsibility. And so, looking at injection of funds, one would assume that it's quite a healthy marriage. So I'm going to look at this very briefly, and it is very brief, and it's a huge subject. I'm going to look at it from the poverty alleviation through employment, the upliftment through skills education, intervention, and the biodiversity conservation through clearing state. My boss once said to me I should have been an auctioneer because I normally talk quite fast, and somebody said to me I might have to talk fast to get through all this, so we're going to carry on. We all know that unemployment is a huge problem in South Africa. I think the figures were released yesterday and it was quite an eye-opener. The stats I managed to find on poverty is that 20% of South Africans live in poverty. And the most effective method of lifting a person out of poverty is to provide sustainable employment and uplift people through upskilling. So that's an essential area too. So if I look at the providing sustainable employment, there's what we call a full-time FTE, full-time equivalent. And this is essentially a measure that converts part-time employment into a full-time equivalent. And this is an acronym that is used quite widely in the working for water circles at the moment, and we seem to confuse ourselves quite a lot about it, and I was certainly confused when I started reading. The historical Working for Water program considered 186 person days in a financial year as a target for one person to work, so that's the ideal objective, and the EPWP programs take a look at 230. So SANParks aim for an FTE is about 230 days in the planning phase of the projects, okay? So that means when we start planning, we try and look to employ a person for 230 days within the program. That's the Working Water FTE. What do you do then is you take the number of people, total number of person days, and divide it by this figure. I really feel like I run a marathon, really. This table here shows the financial years, the number of beneficiaries that we've employed, and I must just state here that this year here we went over from the old water, I think it was called Waterworks, it's a long time ago, system, into the WIM system. No, sorry, this was when we implemented the Waterworks system, and so prior to that we weren't managing the information coming out of the project, so we've only got a few projects into the system, that's why that figure there is quite low. But this is the number of beneficiaries that we've employed through the different financial years from 2002-3 onwards. If we take the FTE of 186 of working for water, we take that number of people, that's equivalent, that's a full-time equivalent. So what this is saying, for that amount of work was done, if those people, all those people had a full-time job, we would have only employed 104 people. So that's what I think has been taken on in reports, and people report on is this number here, which is different to, you can see this figure here, which can be debated, 9,135 beneficiaries. If you take the FTE from working for water, it leaves you with only 3,552 full-time equivalent jobs, and if you look at the EPWP, it leaves you even less. And that's the number of projects that we're running at the time, so we've gone to 10 to 43. And this is the ratio, so that's the difference between the 104 jobs and the 702. And I think that's something that we should look at. And this information comes out of the WIM system. So my question is the FTE a correct measure to use when looking at projects' contributions to poverty alleviation? And then the other question would be, the recommendation might be to look at the number of days a beneficiary works over the history of employment. And that's what this table is showing, this figure is showing here. And if you look at this graph on this side, I've binned these. So this is, I've taken the number of potential working days that a person has worked in the program from the first date that they started work, to their last date seen on the timesheets. And then I've taken the number, so that's a period of time, and then they've taken the number of days they've actually been recorded as working. And I put these into these bins. So there's a couple of, what this is saying here is that this is, that's like 10%, 20%, that's 100% of their work opportunities have been achieved. And then this is above, so you can maybe tolerate this 1.25, 125% by looking at some people who might work overtime. But I've condensed this into fewer bins, and you'll see that the most people are getting sort of like 80% work opportunities. So what I'm saying here is if you can work 230 days in a year, you in a working water program in SANParks, so they're probably going to achieve 80% of that. So is that alleviating poverty or not? I think the areas that you need to worry about are these areas down here. So that's one thing, looking at the poverty side, and the upliftment of skills, unemployment, upliftment and education, interventions. So it's widely acknowledged that if you're going to lift somebody out of poverty, you need to upskill them, and are we being able to do that? So I quickly phoned our social development coordinators. We have 6 clusters at SANParks with 5 social development coordinators, and I asked them what they were looking at. So what they felt were the most important courses, and I'm going to show you that now. But between 2002-3 financial year and the 12-13 financial year, we've had over 100 different courses run that comes out of WIMS, where that number of people have gone through those courses. But remember, that one person might have gone through many courses. So we look at this table here. This table shows I took the top 10 training interventions on the database, and then I took what the SDCs considered to be the important ones. So in this column here, you can see what the SDCs said. So ABET training for the SDCs is very important. And when I spoke to them, all the ones I spoke to immediately brought up this ABET training, but it's very, very low. I think it's one of the lowest that we have, being 0.19% of the people who have gone through training have done ABET training. So that's quite interesting. You'll see that 36% of the training is related to the tasks. So you'll find, if you look at this and you go through it, you'll see that there's chainsaw is also relatively low considering. And then something that induction is quite high, it's the highest we have. So this in itself is quite interesting to look and see what training people are getting. So if you take, for instance, first aid level 3, I don't know if this is an error or not in the database, but there's no records of first aid level 3. But if somebody wants to exit the program into
a sector that would allow them to, with the first aid level 3, to improve themselves, then you're not getting there. So one of the greatest threats, one of the greatest threats to biodiversity conservation is invasive alien plants, and I think that's widely accepted. And it's very difficult from our data just to assess whether we're actually making gains towards biodiversity conservation through the clearing of plants. And the one area that I have been able to look at is increasing the occurrence of invasive alien plants within SANParks estate. So then the other thing we could look at is the control of the threat of invasive plants from beyond the boundaries of the state and implementation of systematic management systems. I think all those three together will give us an indication. The area, SANParks area, this is a very much an overview shot, and it's really not effective, and I'm sorry, 4 o'clock this morning my GIS wasn't good, so I can't break this down more. But that's the total hectares that SANParks manages, and these are the total areas, sorry, that should read inside SANParks, that we've been, that we've had cleared, and this is the total areas outside SANParks that we've cleared. But what you need to consider, a lot of this area might be falling into the arid areas, so there might be very low infestations there. The sum of all the all the clearing efforts gives us this graph, and so what I've looked at here is I've taken the first follow-up, how many person days have been spent on the first follow-up through time, which is the different stages, and how the invasive have dropped down. So that's the sort of curve that we're looking at, which is what one would sort of expect. So we're getting on top of the problem as we come lower down, and we may be going into maintenance phase. But this is all, I think there's hundreds of records that we're looking at here. And this is looking at all the species lumped together. So this is very much a snapshot, but it does ask you to actually dig down deeper into the data to see what actually is going on. Then I've just taken some parks at complete random, or some projects at complete random. In Kruger we have 4 projects, 4 working border projects, and we have a biocontrol project and 2 working on land. But looking at the working border, your initial treatment, then you seem to have a spike after the initial treatment to the first follow-up, and then it's dropped down, and over time, a period of time, we come down to these very low maintenance levels. This is maybe a typical sort of graph that you would expect with an invasive clearing program. The macro and arid parks, so we have initial treatment, then we have the sudden drop down to very low work intensity on these areas, which again would probably be can be explained by a very low regeneration of invasives in these arid parks. Golden Gate Highlands, which is interesting because this is a grasslands park and we've got mainly wattle in the park, and this is again very typical of what I think a grassland should be able to do. You can have a high infestation of invasives, and then through clearing intervention with fire, and Golden Gate burns every year, so we should really not have an alien problem there as far as the wattles and those fire climax species go, and that's what that graph there is showing. So in summary, poverty alleviation, the concerns arise around the high number of beneficiaries in the program who have a low workload. So what we're saying here is there's a lot of beneficiaries who actually aren't achieving their work objectives. They join the working forward program and think they're going to get a year of work, and those 230 days maybe only equates to, comes up to 100 days. And so this needs to be unpacked further. We can look at the impact of seasonal work. So a lot of the projects are saying there's seasonal work, or the other projects, some projects are saying that a household will have 3 members working for water, and they'll rotate. So every different members in the household will have the dignity of having a job and bringing money back into the house. So then we need to decide, is that actually effective with dropping our FTE? And where beneficiaries do not achieve a target FTE or target beneficiary FTE, which is not, which is saying how many person days that person could have worked out of the 230, and these are taken into what is above is taken into consideration, then we need to do some further investigation. Upliftment skills through schools and education interventions. I think this is probably the area that we're falling most down on, mostly. And when I spoke to the SDCs, I'm not a training person. I think as I get older, I become more interested in it, and I'm not too sure why. But I've moved away from the plants to the people. Maybe it's just I'm more intolerant. But training of project managers in soft skills and mentoring. So the SDCs basically felt that the project managers weren't really skilled enough weren't upskilled, not that they're skilled enough, they weren't trained enough in how to do mentoring and the soft skills. So that was to them one of the most important factors. Do complete and thorough assessments of beneficiaries. So there's an aptitude test leading into an ABIT program. So as I mentioned, all of them have mentioned ABIT, and this is quite an important thing. So finding out what that beneficiary is actually interested in and pushing them down that road. So sort of just doing the same old year, you give them some sort of skill, and that will also lead into the longer term commitment to training of beneficiaries. So one of the challenges I think is every year we're getting funding, and it's almost seen as a yearly or an annual funding, and the next year you get another amount of annual funding and you start again. But we should really say, okay, for the next 3 years, this is where we want to get a particular beneficiary. And then the contribution to biodiversity. The primary assessment of WIM's data, looking at the work effort of an NBAL level, and here combined with the program, so this is 4 o'clock in the morning. I think this shows us that we maybe are going in the right way. I think more work needs to be done on that, and maybe Lorena's paper later might divulge a little bit more. But I think in effect that if you can consider a reduction of invasive alien plants, cover and density, spread and density, and a good management program, you're probably going to be achieving your biodiversity objectives. So conclusion through this debate, though there are debates around the dinner table and the hangers-on in the relationship not discussed here, that challenge the housekeeper's skills. So we have a lot of things that are challenging us with our relationship within parks, which challenges our funding, our spending of the funding. The bed partner and the marriage the marriage between poverty alleviation driven funding by NRMP and biodiversity conservation is in good health. Sorry, left that one out. Well, that would seem to be so from the SANParks perspective. So that's my conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nicholas. Is there any questions for this?
Thanks, Nicholas. I noticed from the figures it seemed to be around about a fifth of your area being cleared was outside the parks. I know one of your colleagues, Llewellyn's, published a little bit on this.
Yes.
But have you got a feeling for whether that's about the right level, or you know?
That's what the data is saying, so that is about the right level, but my feeling is that we actually are doing a little bit more outside the parks. I was only looking at what the NBAL work has been done, so we have a whole strategy planned, sort of trying to look forward, and a lot of those areas. So, for instance, Kruger outside in the southern areas, and this year we're planning to do a lot more work outside. So the objective probably of the project or the projects are to clear the, especially where we can, like Kruger, where we can clear the park or get the park down to maintenance level, then we can start protecting it. So we will work outside, and I figure working outside the park, and I think Llewellyn must correct me that his boundaries are more looking at the boundary from the park fence in, and I sort of flip that over, so nearly 1.5 kilometers outside. I think working outside the park is better because then you don't get the disruption of conservation areas through people working on it and building relationships with other landowners. But that's a whole strategy that we're trying to aim for. So I think next year, if I did put these stats up on the board, outside the park will be increasing every year, and the amount of effort on the areas inside the park should be decreasing as we're decreasing the species, the densities. Ben, I don't think you're allowed to answer questions. Ask a question because you did work for us.
Nicholas, I see you lump together your social development skills and your functional skills. I would have liked to see how your functional skills contribute to the effectiveness, enabling your contractors to venture into other areas of work in and around the park.
I lumped everything, Ben, so everybody's lost out. But I think that that's one of the things we want to look at is developing skills that can take people not just outside the park, but I mean when we look at where beneficiaries are going, and we're not really tracking that as well as we should be doing. There's a lot of opportunities within parks for beneficiaries to move into, so such as field rangers. I mean, Kruger have a huge problem. Every time we train people through the ranks, they get then go into ranger posts. There's tourism, so there's a lot of things that is working. But I lumped a lot of things together because of time and unpacking, not time of presentation, but unpacking the data, but I agree with you.